Tell us a little bit about how you've traveled all across China in cities. How is this issue of public safety, public security, homelessness in particular? What is that like? Many people say homelessness does not exist, at least in the big cities. How do you see those issues from the firsthand experiences that you've had?
I mean, this is a question I'm extremely passionate about, and I'm going to try to link it to some of the very important points that you made before, especially about, I guess, people's like mentality when it comes to being like the after ripple effect of being colonized, right? But anyway, I'll start with my everyday life in China, I guess. And I think as a woman, I think that is one of like the most deepest concerns and, something that I am so deeply I care about, right? Because I actually lived in New York for 8 years before I moved to Shanghai. And New York is everything that you just described, the unpredictability, the chaos, the erraticness, and it is so scary because New York is technically one of the wealthiest cities in the world. And yet you see drug use on the street, you see homelessness everywhere. And because of those very intense and undignifying living conditions, people are aggressive and they're unhappy and they're extremely dissatisfied with the way that nobody is there to help them. Nobody is there, and there's no structural help to get these people out of their current situations, right? Because again, I think because the West is so individualistic and there's this capitalist mindset of, oh, this person is on drugs and that is their own fault. They're inherently just like a waste or whatever. Because of this harmful mindset, people are not questioning the system at play that is causing the raising rates of homelessness. They're not questioning why the drug use is going, higher and higher every single year in the West. And so when I was about 30, I turned 30 in New York, and I just realized, I'm not an American citizen as well. So living in the US as a non-American citizen is also very precarious. And I have the anchor and the privilege of being able to have a home in China. And so of course, I really started to consider moving to China. And as I did, I really realized that I'm like a weight is off my shoulders. I can breathe. I don't have to look, behind me every second of the day. Truly, when I was in New York City, people are genuinely scared to go home at night, right? Or they're scared to walk on the street at night. And there is a good reason for that. It's not even an exaggeration. I've been on the public transportation system. There's been people armed with knives just pointing them while sitting down. There's people sleeping on the trains, but then getting arrested for it by the US military. It's just so almost dystopian, but that is the reality of a crumbling Western empire. In China, the ease that I feel, of being able to walk at any moment of the day, especially deep into the night, walk on the streets, I feel extremely safe, extremely protected. I see one of my favorite things and like you said, I really like to document everyday life. And I'm not just here to document the big skylines or the amazing AI technology, right? Sure, that's all very impressive. But for me, I also love to be on the streets and then see a moped that is, the key is in the ignition and the driver is somewhere else, right? The driver is usually maybe a delivery worker or delivery driver who is a working class man, and he just leaves his bike on the street with the bike in the ignition. That could never happen in the West, and we know that, I see kids on the street all the time. The other day, I saw children playing musical chairs, right? Just outside at 11 p.m. with a bunch of chairs that were outside. And this kind of vibrancy, the elders who go exercise every single day, who go to the parks and who dance together, I think that for me is very moving because it shows a generation that fought a revolutionary struggle and gets to enjoy the fruits of their labor today, right? Who lived in a time where China was developing and going through extreme poverty and recovering from the century of humiliation and Japanese aggression, and were, promised all these things by the Communist Party. And I understand that maybe at the time, there was some kind of skepticism or uncertainty, but these promises have been fulfilled. And I don't just obviously talk about urban life. I mean, Shanghai is one of the best cities I've ever been in. It's unquestionably the most convenient place I've ever been, the safest city I've ever lived in. But this also applies for the rural areas as well. And I haven't been to all the rural areas in China, but the ones that I have been to are just as clean. They're just as safe. In fact, they're even more communal because the communities are tighter and they live more in proximity, and they literally, all their doors are wide open, unlocked. You know, nobody is scared of theft or crime. It's just like, we're in the same village. Come over, eat with me. I don't know who you are. I don't know your name, but you're my family, right? That is the mentality, and it's beautiful. It's utterly beautiful. And I really devote a lot of my time trying to dispel Western propaganda, but the questions that really personally bother me, you know, like for example, about the safety or the cleanliness or the cultural hegemony that apparently China is facing, but actually is what the West has tried to do. It's just all so hypocritical. But also in, you know, the rural areas as well, the culture is alive and well. And if anything is being revitalized, you know, I'm very passionate about rural revitalization. And I also think that all the developments that are happening in the urban areas, you get to see the own version of it in the rural countryside as well. All the rural villages are connected to WeChat, Alipay. They're not just isolated and marginalized, you know, by their own rural systems. They maintain their own culture, they maintain their own customs and traditions, but at the same time, they're not on the fringes of society, right? They get to sell their fresh farm produce directly to cities. I just went to a village in Guangdong, actually, and it's great that we've been to like similar regions, right? Because you've also seen the changes yourself. So this village is famous for lychees, and I think Guangdong region, they're very famous for lychee trees and longyan trees and this beautiful fresh produce. And there's a bunch of farmers over there who sell their produce. And a way to do that now is through live streaming, right? Is through going online, staying at home, going online in front of a camera, and then being able to sell all these fresh produce. And then the best thing is that you can also get the produce delivered to any part of China within a day or two. And so I got lychees, fresh lychees, shipped to my home in Shanghai from that Guangdong village within a day after they were picked from the trees, from farmer to consumer, right? Like there's something about that where these farmers can make money, not just in their little communities, because that obviously gets very competitive and you can't make that much money from that, but they can expand their businesses as well and directly pay the farmers to enjoy the fruits that they grew. So I went on a bit of a tangent, but these are all the things I love about China, and I can go on and on and on because I think these are all parts of daily life that are very important, and they show the socialist path that China is on.